I stopped to help a little boy find his mother in a crowded park. After their tearful reunion, she handed me a note, and the words on it made my hands shake. I asked what it meant. She only pointed to her son and said, "Can't you see it?" I looked closer at the boy's face and froze. The truth was unthinkable. 30 minutes later, the police were at my parents' door. This is a story about a family secret, one that was hidden in plain sight. Before we begin, tell me, what city are you watching from today? And don't forget to subscribe for more daily stories. All right, let's go back to that crowded festival. The feeling of being an outsider in my own family was never loud or obvious. It was quiet, like a low hum in the background of my life. I loved my parents, Richard and Susan, and I knew they loved me too, in their own way. But our love felt polite, measured, never the messy, instinctive, unconditional kind I saw in other families. It showed in the small details. They were tall, fair-skinned, with light gray eyes. I was average height, olive-toned, with eyes so dark they were almost black. They were calm, logical, reserved. I was emotional, expressive, a little chaotic. I always felt like a guest in their house who had overstayed her welcome by about 25 years. When I was a child, they told me I was adopted. They said it was a happy story, about a young, brave girl who gave me to them so I could have a better life. And for years, I believed it. But as I got older, the missing pieces of my identity started to ache, like a phantom limb. It wasn't about rejection or resentment. It was about not knowing. Not knowing who I came from. Not knowing who my birth mother was. 2 months ago, I finally gathered the courage to start searching for her, quietly, in secret. I didn't want to hurt my parents' feelings. The day my life changed forever, I was at the city's annual Summer Street Festival, a loud, colorful sea of people. I'd gone there hopping to escape the silence of my own unanswered questions. That's when I saw him. A little boy, maybe 6 years old, frozen in the middle of the crowd, his face red and streaked with tears, eyes wide with fear. He was lost. Something inside me broke open. I knelt down, creating a small island of calm in the chaos. "Hey there," I said softly. "Are you lost? What's your name?" "Sam," he whispered, trembling. "I can't find my mommy." For the next hour, my own problems disappeared. My only mission was to help this little boy find his mother. We held hands tightly, a quiet promise in the middle of the noise, and began searching together. We went to the festival's security tent, described his mother, and waited. When the reunion finally came, it was beautiful. A woman burst into the tent, her face a mirror of the same terror I'd seen in her son. "Sam," she cried. The little boy dropped my hand and ran into her arms. They collapsed together, crying, laughing, holding on like the world had stopped. I stood back, smiling, ready to slip away and let them have their moment. But when the woman, her name was Laura, stood up, still clutching her son, she looked at me. And her expression changed. Her eyes, a deep, familiar shade of brown, locked on mine with something I couldn't understand. Recognition. Shock. Fear. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice trembled with emotion, but her gaze, it was haunted. "Thank you so much." "Of course," I said, a little nervous under her stare. "I'm just glad he's safe." As I turned to leave, she grabbed my arm. "Wait," she said urgently. Her hands shook as she fumbled in her purse, pulled out a pen, and scribbled something on a crumpled napkin. She pressed it into my palm. "Please," she whispered, her eyes filled with something I couldn't name. "Please, just read this." Then, before I could speak, she disappeared into the crowd, her son's small hand still gripping hers. And that was the moment everything I thought I knew about my life began to unravel. I stood there, my heart pounding with a strange, new feeling I couldn't explain. In my hand was the crumpled napkin, still warm from her touch. I thought it might be a phone number. Maybe an invitation to coffee, a simple thank you for helping her son. But it wasn't that. It was something else. Something impossible. A question, or maybe a truth, that would change everything I thought I knew about myself. As I read the words, it felt like the ground shifted beneath me. The fragile foundation of my entire life, my identity, began to crack. Around me, the noise of the festival faded into nothing. The music, the laughter, the voices, all dissolved into a dull, distant roar. Laura stood a few yards away, holding her son close, watching me. Her expression was raw, a mix of fear, hope, and heartbreak. I unfolded the napkin with shaking hands. The handwriting was rushed and uneven, but the words were perfectly, terribly clear. It wasn't a question. It was a confession. You have a birthmark, shaped like a tiny pale star on your left shoulder. I know this because I kissed it every night for the first 2 years of your life. My name is Laura, and I am your mother. The world went silent. My mind refused to process it. It had to be a mistake, a cruel joke, a misunderstanding. It couldn't be real. And yet, my hand moved on its own. I reached for my collar, pulled it aside, and there on my left shoulder was the mark. A small, pale star. The same birthmark I'd seen 1,000 times in the mirror, a meaningless detail, I'd thought. Until now. I looked up, and my eyes found Laura. Her face crumpled with grief and recognition. I stumbled toward her, my voice trembling. "What is this?" I whispered, holding out the napkin, the proof of something that couldn't be true. "This has to be a mistake. My mother is Susan. My father is Richard. I was adopted." Laura's expression shattered. Tears spilled down her face as she reached for me, her voice breaking. "No, my love," she said, her hand gripping my arm. "It's not a mistake. Oh God, after all these years, can't you see it?" "See what?" I cried. My voice cracked, confusion and dread tangling inside me. She turned to her son and pulled him gently in front of her. "Look at him," she whispered. "Don't look at his hair, look at his eyes, the shape of his face." And I did. I looked at him, really looked. The same dark almond-shaped eyes. The same small, straight nose. The same stubborn chin. It was like staring into a mirror of my own childhood. Like seeing my face reflected in a 6-year-old boy. I froze. The last pieces of denial broke apart inside me. Laura's voice trembled as she spoke the words that would end one life and begin another. "You weren't adopted, my love," she whispered. "You were taken." I felt the world tilt, my knees weak, my breath gone. She guided me to a quiet bench away from the noise and laughter of the festival. And there, through her tears, she told me the story. The real story of my life. She told me about a day 23 years ago, in a park much like this one. She had been a young, single mother. And I had been her 2-year-old daughter, a little girl with a star-shaped birthmark on her shoulder. She had turned her back for only a second. Just one moment. And in that moment, everything changed. And when she turned back, I was gone. She told me about the 23 years that followed. The endless police investigations that went cold. The private detectives who found nothing. The false leads, the shattered hopes. And a grief so deep it had hollowed her from the inside out. She never stopped looking for me. Not for a single day. Even after she built a new life, a new husband, a new son. The hole in her heart, shaped exactly like me, never closed. I sat there on that park bench. A stranger caught between the mother I'd just found. And the brother I never knew existed. My mind replayed every memory, every quiet dinner, every distant moment with the people I thought were my parents. It all felt wrong. The truth hit me like a knife. They weren't my parents. They were my kidnappers. And my entire life, my entire identity, was built on a monstrous, 23-year-old lie. Laura looked at me, eyes that mirrored my own, filled with 23 years of pain and trembling hope. "What do we do now?" she whispered. I stared at her, at my real mother, and then down at my shaking hands. I knew there was only one thing left to do. I pulled out my phone. It was time to go home. Time to confront the people who had stolen my life. The world around us felt still, unreal. Laura's hand brushed mine, her touch both fragile and fierce. Her body trembled with decades of grief and new, terrifying hope. "What do we do now?" she asked again, her voice breaking. Her eyes, my eyes, searched mine for an answer I didn't yet have. For a moment I froze. My mind was a storm of emotions. There was anger, sharp and cold. At Richard and Susan, for everything they'd taken from me, from us. But buried beneath that rage was something else. A confusing, unwanted sense of love. They had raised me, tucked me in at night, read me bedtime stories. How could people who had done those things also be monsters? Then I looked at Sam, my little brother, leaning sleepily against Laura's shoulder, his face innocent and confused. And I saw the pain etched deep into my mother's eyes. In that moment, I realized my feelings didn't matter. Only the truth did. "I know who to call," I said quietly. My voice shook, but it was steady enough. I dialed the number. The call was to a man Laura had mentioned. Detective Miller. A cold case investigator who had refused to give up, even when everyone else had. I told him everything. Who I was, where I was, and the impossible truth that had unfolded at the festival. There was a long silence on the other end. Then his voice came through, sharp, calm, and serious. "Stay right where you are," he said. "Don't go back to the house alone. I'm on my way." The drive back to the quiet suburban street I had always called home felt unreal, like moving through someone else's dream. I sat in the back of Laura's car, Sam asleep beside me, his head resting gently on my shoulder. When we arrived, Detective Miller and two plainclothes officers were waiting at the corner. The plan was simple and terrifying. They needed a confession. They needed Richard and Susan to admit what they had done. And they needed it on tape. And I was the only one who could get it. I was the bait. They fitted me with a small, hidden microphone, tucked into the collar of my shirt. "Just get them to talk about the day they adopted you," Detective Miller instructed, his voice calm and steady. "Get them to admit they were in that park. We'll be listening to everything. You won't be alone." I stood at the end of my street. The same street I'd ridden my bike down 1,000 times. And looked at the house I had always called home. But it wasn't home anymore. It was the destination of the most terrifying mission of my life. I walked up the stone pathway, each step heavy, echoing in my chest. The wind chimes Susan loved so much tinkled softly in the breeze. A sound that once meant safety, but now felt like a funeral bell. I took a deep, shuddering breath and knocked on the door. Susan opened the door. Her face softened into that warm, familiar smile. A smile I had trusted my whole life. A smile that was now nothing but a mask. "Thea, honey, you're home," she said. Her voice calm, sweet, and completely false. We were starting to get worried. How was the festival? I looked at her, at the woman who had stolen me from my real mother, the woman who had built her life around a lie. And I said the words Detective Miller had told me to say, the words that would start the end of hers. "Hi, Mom," I said evenly. "The festival was interesting. We need to talk." I stepped inside. The scent of lemon polish and Susan's favorite potpourri wrapped around me. The smell of my childhood. A smell that now felt sickeningly sweet. My heart pounded like a trapped bird in my chest. The tiny, hidden microphone against my skin felt like both armor and a ticking bomb. Susan smiled faintly, closing the door behind me. "You met someone?" she asked, her tone curious and motherly. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. Was it a young man?" "No, Mom," I said quietly. My voice calm, almost detached. Not a man. From the living room, my father, Richard, looked up from behind his newspaper. Thea, you're home, he said, smiling easily. Everything all right. I walked to the center of the room, to the heart of their peaceful, stolen life. They both looked at me with warm, unsuspecting faces. The faces of the people who had raised me, fed me, loved me in their own cold, distant way. And now I was about to destroy them. I met a woman today, I began, my voice steady, every word rehearsed, every pause deliberate. And her little boy. He got lost at the festival. I helped him find her. Susan's face softened again, her expression full of gentle pride. Oh, that's so like you, dear, she said. You've always had such a big heart. She was very kind, I continued. But she told me something incredible, and something tragic. Their smiles faltered, just slightly. She said that 23 years ago, her little girl, just 2 years old, was taken from her, kidnapped from a park not far from here. I watched them closely. There it was, the faintest flicker of fear behind their eyes, a tightening around their mouths. It was small, but it was there. How awful, Richard said, folding his paper slowly. Did they ever find who did it? No, I replied, locking eyes with him. They never did. The little girl was never found. The air in the room shifted. Heavy now, thick with something unspoken. Her name was Laura, I said softly. She told me she spent the last 23 years searching for her daughter. Neither of them spoke. The silence between us stretched. A silence full of guilt and ghosts. That's a terrible story, Thea, Susan finally said. Her voice tight now, her smile brittle. But I don't see what it has to do with you, dear. I took a slow breath. My voice dropped to a whisper. Low, cold, final. She told me something else, I said. She told me her daughter, the one who was taken, had a birthmark. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. A small, pale, star-shaped birthmark. Right here. And slowly, deliberately, I reached up and pulled my collar aside. My fingers trembled as they brushed against the skin of my left shoulder. The silence that followed felt heavy, deep, suffocating, the kind that only comes after a truth has run out of places to hide. I watched as Susan's face, once calm and politely concerned, shattered before my eyes. Her hand flew to her mouth, a small, broken sob escaping her lips. My father, Richard, went pale, his body stiffening as panic set in. Susan, be quiet, he hissed, his voice trembling not with anger but fear. Don't say another word. Then he turned to me, his eyes filled with a wild, desperate fury. You have no idea what you're talking about, he said. You met some unstable woman who told you a story and you believed her. We are your parents. We raised you. We loved you. Did you, I whispered, did you love me, or just the secret you kept for so long? His voice cracked as he shouted, We gave you a good life, better than she ever could have. We saw you that day in the park, alone. Your mother was nowhere around. We knew you were meant to be ours. It was fate. And there it was, the confession. The ugly, self-serving truth spilling into the air, and captured, I knew, by the tiny wire hidden against my skin. Richard froze, realizing what he'd just done. The anger in his eyes faded, replaced by sheer terror. He looked at me, my calm, tearful face, and finally understood. This wasn't a family argument anymore. It was an interrogation. Just as that realization sank in, the front door burst open. Detective Miller was the first inside, followed by a team of uniformed officers. The living room, my childhood living room, erupted into chaos. Flashing lights, shouts, the sound of handcuffs. I stood still in the middle of it all, the eye of the storm. I watched Susan collapse to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched Richard, the man I once saw as strong and untouchable, raise his hands in surrender. I looked at them, the people who had stolen me and raised me, and felt nothing. Only a hollow, aching pity. Then I saw her, standing in the doorway. Laura. My real mother. Her face was streaked with tears, both beautiful and broken. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I knew my old life was gone, destroyed in the storm of sirens and lies. The days that followed blurred together, police interviews, therapy sessions, endless questions. The news called it the miracle of the lost daughter. But inside, I was torn apart. I was furious for the life they had stolen from me. But buried beneath that anger was something I didn't want to admit. When I closed my eyes, I didn't just see kidnappers. I saw the woman who bandaged my knees, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, the warmth of their hugs, the sound of their laughter. They were monsters, but for 23 years, they had also been my parents. And a small, broken part of me still loved them. A week later, I sat in a cold, sterile conference room at the district attorney's office. Laura, my mother, was there, fierce and protective, her voice trembling with 20 years of rage. "They stole my daughter's life," she said. "They deserve to spend the rest of theirs in prison." The DA nodded slowly, then turned to me. "With your testimony, Thea," the district attorney said, "that's almost certainly what will happen. A jury will see them as nothing but monsters. We just need your full cooperation." In that moment, I was faced with a choice. I could take my vengeance, ensure that the people who had hurt me so deeply would spend the rest of their lives behind bars. It was what they deserved. It was justice. But as I looked into my real mother's eyes, so full of righteous, burning anger, something inside me shifted. More punishment, more years lost, more pain. None of it would heal what was broken. It would only leave behind another kind of emptiness. "No," I said softly, my voice trembling but steady in the quiet room. Laura stared at me, stunned. "What, Thea, what are you saying?" "What they did was monstrous, unforgivable," I said, meeting her eyes. "They stole me from you. They stole my entire life. And yes, they must face the consequences. But they also raised me. They loved me in their own damaged, selfish way. Sending them to die in prison doesn't feel like justice. It just feels like more pain." I turned to the district attorney. "Is there another way?" I asked. "A plea deal may be something that punishes them, but also acknowledges the complicated truth of what they did." The resolution that followed wasn't clean or easy. It wasn't victory. It was something messier and maybe more human. Richard and Susan pled guilty. They didn't get the life sentences Laura wanted. Instead, they received shorter terms, years of mandatory psychological therapy, and the rest of their lives marked by the truth they could no longer hide from. A year later, I live in a small, sunlit apartment. It's mine, truly mine. I'm rebuilding a life, one piece at a time. My relationship with my real mother, Laura, and my brother, Sam, is slow, sometimes awkward, but beautifully real, like learning to breathe again after years underwater. And once a month, I do something I never imagined I could. I visit a low-security prison. I sit across from the two people who, at the same time, gave me love and stole my life. We don't talk about the past anymore. We talk about the future, theirs and mine. It's not forgiveness, not yet. But for the first time in all our lives, it's the truth. And in that truth, no matter how painful, there's finally a chance for peace. An unbelievably powerful story about secrets, loss, and the hard, compassionate road toward healing. What a testament to Thea's strength and her heart. What do you think of her final decision? Could you have shown the same compassion to those who hurt you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional and thought-provoking stories. And as always, thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.